Hello and welcome to Dialogue. Despite the recent terrorist attack and the retaliatory airstrikes in Kabul, the U.S. has now announced the completion of its evacuation operations in Afghanistan. The chaos caused by the rush to withdraw troops had generated criticism of the Biden administration both at home and abroad, and there were calls to extend the deadline. But now, what will the U.S. do in response to the pending post-deadline crisis in Afghanistan? And can the Taliban prevent Afghanistan from becoming the hotbed of terrorism? To find out more, I'm joined in the studio by He Wenping, Senior Research Fellow of the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, via satellite by Professor Howie Toker, American Graduate School in Paris, and Mohammad Zamir Asadi, correspondent at Independent News Pakistan, and via Skype by correspondent Abdul Haidariz from Kabul in the first part of the program, and later by Peter Kuznick, Professor of History at American University. That's our topic. I'm Xu Qinduo. Welcome to the show, Wenping. If you look at the rapid development over Pakistan, over the withdrawal, the evacuation of the U.S. forces and U.S. citizens, so after the completion, what will come next for the U.S. as well as for Taliban? Wenping.
So I think this withdrawal even happens earlier than we expected. Because before the United States mentioned they will withdraw by the end of today, 31. But now, even in the early time, the local time is just, early morning, and then the U.S. made the announcement saying everything has been completed. So such a surprise, I think, even earlier than expected. The reason is because after that explosion, that was so deadly explosion, and then I think the United States has changed somehow their strategy. No longer, bring those personal civilian people out, especially Afghanistan people, just focus on American troops. So that's why make those things quicker than expected. Anyway, now all those, I think the number is still huge, saying there are 100,000 Afghan people still waiting to be executed. But, there's no other means, even though the State Secretary Blinken said, just waiting, we will come, we will get you out. But this is by lip service, I think, because all those airports now is in the hands of Taliban, and also there's no single troops based there, there is no single diplomats based there, so everything now is no longer have any presence of America. So how could they make those this 100,000 Afghan people out of their home? Because those people, they used to be worked for U.S. troops, and they used to be provide some translation anyway. So they are still saying they are waiting for U.S. to bring them out. But actually, we now see this chaos, especially the withdrawal, also accompanied with a lot of bloodshed. There is a lot of even 13 American soldiers, and then plus a lot, more than 150 Afghan people, and plus 3 British personnel. And then following the day, we heard in order to revenge, to strike this ISIS-K, and then the U.S. made another side effect. It's called a side sacrifice, so-called. That is 9 family members in Kabul, the local people, has been killed. So there's lots of bloodshed paved the way for this withdrawal.
Mm-hmm. Well, Professor Toker, in Paris, if you look at the completion, if you look at what's going on the ground, rapid changes. The U.S. basically announced that the completion of evacuation. But what's next? What's the priority for the next step for the U.S. as well as for their European allies, for example?
I think that if we avoid analysis and anticipations, which we in the West have tendency to make often regarding a war situation, a violent situation, based on our past experience. Look at the way what has been happening through an American and Western point of view in Afghanistan over the last few weeks or months is being compared to Vietnam, for example, for good reasons apparently. But last war's experience is not necessarily the best guide in anticipating regarding present.
Sorry, Professor, we have to cut you off there. And we go live to the conference held by Taliban.
در نخواهش خپل اولاد څنګه کوي در نخواهش خپل اولاد څنګه کوي داسې زمانه هم کالی غواړي دا زنا چارم ځکه خیر ټولوي یو قاف ډوډۍ غواړي کالی غواړي ستاسو خو زړه د خوشحالۍ ډک دی ستاسو خو زړه د خوشحالۍ ډک دی راشئ په ما لږ زړه خوږی پیدا کړئ چې د 25 کالو ورک دی ترېنه د هغې کونډې مور بچی پیدا کړئ
It is a possible meaning talking about the orphans and the ones who are need in the for food, whose fathers are dead and in last 20 years and who are very needy. There is no work in the country, all the places, the ways, the streets are full of unemployed.
د چا د سترګو مخه شوې راته چې د ژوندون ځینې بېزاره ګرځم د هر یو کور ځینې همدا غږ راځي زه د 5 ورځو نهار ګرځم
I have been without food for many days because of some people. Don't destroy our culture. Don't.
If you look at this conference, the seriousness of the people attending the conference, obviously for Taliban, previously a guerrilla force, a powerful guerrilla force, now is becoming the ruling party and the governing party. Basically, they will be held responsible, accountable for whatever peace, stability, development of this new nation, let's say. And say there's a transformation, or there's a necessary transformation of Taliban, to learn to govern, to learn to run this daily business, for example, of the daily security of people's, to feed the people, well-clothed, or provide shelter for its people. That's the new challenge for the Taliban. Are you confident that they, what kind of challenges do you think we're going to face?
Yeah, you are right. This is the transformation that the Taliban have to, gone through. Actually, I cannot say I have confidence or they have the confidence, but all the people, I think, in the Afghan and also outside of Afghanistan, they all watch. I think all the world now has been paying great attention to this transformation that Taliban can do or can fail to do. Nowadays, we should say a lot of challenges lying ahead for Taliban. For example, in terms of political, this new inclusive government forming, this issue now is a daunting first challenge. And people all watch, including United Nations, watching Taliban, whether they can keep the promise to form a very inclusive this new government. This is number one. Number two, the security. The security issue from this airport explosion, now we see clearly those terrorist groups, those extremist groups are not diminishing at all. They are not disappeared at all. They are still there and still can make things, make big things happening. You see, a lot of people has been killed. So how to maintain this security? It's the saying like some Taliban official mentioned before, saying if US troops left Afghanistan, and then there will no single bombing happening. For this, very assurance, I still doubtful about that. So it's not saying they just want to kill US soldiers, because the ISSK, when they made that explosion, the suicide explosion, they made clear saying they want to kill those Afghans. They have been worked with US. Yeah, they want to kill those like a translator, those doing business with the US. So anyway, they want to kill those Afghan people rather than just kill the US soldiers. So which means this security issue remain there. So apart from that, of course, diplomatically, Taliban also need to get international recognition. This is another very challenging job for them. And also, like Xindoi just mentioned, those daily life issue. Now we heard the people cannot get salary for months even, and the bank now even the no cash available can, to give those deposit people. And also all those food price, gasoline, daily consuming things now is soaring. The price is soaring. So this is the thing with people's daily life. If they cannot, make the price stable and make some cash available in the bank, I think this people's satisfactory cannot. It's very hard to meet
right.
this demand.
Right. Well, the U.S. Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, announced the closing of American diplomatic missions in Afghanistan and then transferred the operation to Doha. So that's about, the future cooperation, the future contact with Taliban or between Washington and Taliban. Let's take a listen what he said about that.
So here's our plan for the days and weeks ahead. First, we built a new team to help lead this new mission. As of today, we've suspended our diplomatic presence in Kabul and transferred our operations to Doha, Qatar, which will soon be formally notified to Congress. Given the uncertain security environment and political situation in Afghanistan, it was the prudent step to take.
Professor Toker, obviously, the U.S., we would agree that this is not the time probably to keep a diplomatic presence in Kabul because of the situation not secure enough. And then you have this diplomatic operation in Doha. So obviously, the U.S. will keep in touch with Taliban. Do you think the U.S. at a certain point will somehow recognize the Taliban-led government in Kabul, and also the U.S. will continue the cooperation with Taliban probably for the sake of fighting terrorism?
I hope the U.S. will stay in touch with, and other Western and non-Western powers will stay in touch with the Taliban, because to a large extent the leverage regarding control and information and intelligence regarding what is really happening in Afghanistan and what is really happening in the power game, in the power share, in the new Afghanistan, which is in the happening right now, once the military victory on the terrain had been marked and clearly spelled out, depends on the kind of contacts that all powers, those who were engaged in conflict and those who are part of political forces in the region, other countries, other groups, etc. So it is understandable that the U.S. Secretary of State would announce that the embassy and the consular services in Kabul, the American ones, will be closed, because you don't keep your embassy in action once you had gone through a military defeat, the way it was exposed and shown to the entire world. But this is not a reason to keep not to keep contacts with the Taliban. As a matter of fact, as we are speaking right now, the Americans are in touch with the Taliban in Doha and through other intermediaries. France, for example, which true enough had completed its military evacuation from Afghanistan 5-6 years ago, announced clearly that it would be interested in keeping diplomatic representation or representation altogether in Kabul, and so did other Western countries. Will that lead to a rapid diplomatic recognition? Depends really highly on what is happening on the terrain, on the what the Taliban will show that it is really doing, not just saying and declaring, because you know that we have a dual system here of the Taliban over the last 10 days or so, in which we hear clear, nice, gentle declarations and promising ones on one hand, and we have every now and then declarations which actually prove the opposite. I don't think there's anybody who can know right now for sure. We'll have to see that over the coming weeks and months.
Well, obviously, there's a UN resolution today in New York that the international community expect the Taliban to honor their commitment to ensure the safety of foreigners, and also Afghanistan will not be used as a hotbed for terror attacks against other countries. And also the China's deputy permanent representative to the UN, Geng Shuang, said the withdrawal is not the end of responsibility, but the beginning of reflection and the correction. Obviously, he was referring to the United States. Here, let me bring in the correspondent, Muhammad Zamir Assad from Pakistan. So obviously, Muhammad, here, the U.S. completion, basically following the Chinese idea, the completion of the evacuation does not mean that's the end of the U.S. involvement, because after all, if you look at the chaos, basically that's created by the hasty withdrawal. So what kind of a role do you expect the U.S. continue to play in Afghanistan?
Definitely, first of all, international community is witnessing that Afghan Taliban, they have really done a great job, as they were very committed with their guerrilla fight against Americans and their allies. So now Afghan Taliban, they are the, actually the real power in Afghanistan, and there are the clear-cut signs then that the international community, is going to develop some kind of, diplomatic or a working relationship with the Afghan Taliban. So there is a big responsibility of on Afghan Taliban, that how do they convince the international community about their role, what they are playing in Afghanistan for the betterment of the Afghan people, for the betterment of the Afghan education system, for the betterment of the Afghan medical system, and the inclusive development plans. So the role which United Nations will be going to play, it all depends on the responsibilities which are now laid on the Afghan Taliban. If Afghan Taliban, they show their commitment and they show their resolve to be played, exclusively for Afghan people, now we see that the mandate is on Afghan Taliban. So if Afghan Taliban are going to play their good role, then definitely United Nations, they will have to step forward. They will have to come up with the solid and the logical ideas to help the Afghan Taliban. Now there are some of the, the elements in the international community who are still reluctant to talk with the Taliban, but it should be very clear, and it should be, and it is very factual that Afghan Taliban are in power, and you will have to talk to them. And there are certain, leaders in the international community who have accepted this reality, and I think it will be in favor of the United Nations, the member of the United Nations, and it will be favor of our region and other international community, that we should have to accept this reality as soon as possible, that now the new setup in Afghanistan has come up. They are announcing their plans of
Right.
at large. So we will.
Okay, if you look at the U.S. completion of evacuation, anyway, this is a completion of a certain phase of the U.S. involvement in Afghanistan. But still, people are looking at what really happened over the past 20 years. Let me bring in a professor from the United States, from the American University, Professor. About this 20 years, many people say, the 20 years strategy of having the war is not necessarily a wrong strategy, a wrong policy. What's wrong probably is with Biden government because of the hasty withdrawal and without a specific plan of the withdrawal. That is a problem. So Peter Kuznick, professor, what is the real, who should be held in certain, accountable for this, and kind of results, nobody expected?
Well, people should have expected these results for a long time. This is not just the product of 20 years of bad policy. This is a product of more than 40 years of bad policy. goes back to the U.S. involvement in 1979, the U.S. involvement throughout the 1980s, when the U.S. effectively trained the Islamic extremists to use against the Soviet Union back during the Cold War. So a lot of the crazies, a lot of these really ugly, nasty people were people who we armed and trained and quote unquote educated. Then after 2001, those people who are looking and saying the problem is Biden's withdrawal was so chaotic, those people are largely the ones who were responsible for getting the United States involved in this ill thought out policy back in 2001 and then doubling down on it. It's very distressing to look at the U.S. media and you see the Leon Panettas and the John Boltons and the Bill Kristol, you see and the generals, Petraeus and McChrystal, the people who brought us this failed policy are now being looked to, and they're the ones who are criticizing the withdrawal. But the policy was wrong from the beginning. There, according to Milton Bearden, who was the CIA station chief in Pakistan in the 1980s, who ran the covert war inside Afghanistan for the CIA, he said that the Taliban would have been willing to give up bin Laden themselves back in 2001. They didn't approve of what bin Laden was doing, and they wanted U.S. help to save face to give up bin Laden. I'm not sure if that would have worked, but the U.S. had met with the Taliban at least 20 times over 3 years before the U.S. invaded. So from the beginning, instead of a small police operation to catch bin Laden and wipe out al-Qaeda, the United States decides to invade. And then the United States doesn't have a strategy for what to do after that. The United States loses interest quickly and invades Iraq. And then people are feeling so energetic about it and so thrilled with it that they're talking about remaking the map of the world, really. Some of the leading neoconservative thinkers were saying, well, first we'll do Afghanistan, and then Iraq, and then we'll overthrow Iran, and then Syria, and then Libya, and then Somalia, then Sudan. The New York Times Sunday Magazine headlined a Sunday Magazine section on January 5th, 2003, American Empire, get used to it. And that's what the people now who are criticizing Biden for doing the right thing by withdrawing are the people who had this fantasy that the U.S. was going to control the world and this would last indefinitely. And they haven't given that up. These are the neoconservatives who still cling to that absurd notion.
Peter, do you think, somehow the people have learned a lesson from the failure in Afghanistan? Probably the U.S. is a bit overambitious and the U.S. cannot actually shape the world as it likes.
That the U.S. is arrogant and hubristic. This notion of American exceptionalism, which is deeply believed in the United States, the idea that the United States is not only different from all other countries, the United States is better than all other countries, that other countries want territory, other countries want minerals, other countries are greedy, they want geopolitical advantage, but the United States goes out in the world and just does the right thing because it believes in spreading freedom and democracy. That crazy idea is finally being punctured. And that's a good thing, because so long as the Americans deluded themselves and other people bought into this idea that the United States could shape the world and make it better, people have to look at the United States. We're talking about the problems with democracy elsewhere. Democracy is hanging on by a thread in the United States. And a lot of the people who are criticizing Biden are the ones who supported Trump, support the lie, want to see Trump back in power, or else some kinder, gentler, and more intelligent version of Trump. And so the United States is no longer in a position to dictate to the world and to hold itself up as a moral example of what the world should be doing. And the United States was never really in that position. That's why there's debates going on now about U.S. history and why people are trying to teach critical race theory or at least grapple with certain aspects of the American past that are less than ideal. With a country founded on slavery, on genocide of the indigenous population, on exploitation of labor in the United States, on suppression of women. So we've got a lot to deal with before we start wearing this shining hat and saying that the world should look to us for leadership. That doesn't mean that the world should look to China for leadership, or Russia, or India. We've got to be working together in order to solve the real problems that confront us all, including dealing with the mess in Afghanistan. The United States needs support and help from China and from Russia, as well as other allies, in order to stop this from being a humanitarian disaster in Afghanistan. The United States can't do that, and Americans, I think, are learning that. The American people want it out of Afghanistan. Nobody likes the messy visuals that we got as the U.S. was departing, but the fact that the U.S. is out of this war is very, very popular in the United States.
Mm-hmm. Well, Professor Toker, looking at the U.S. departure from Afghanistan, what do Europeans see that, in particular the U.S. exceptionalism? Are European countries along with this exceptionalism, and is there any learning a lesson, for example, for European capitals to think about, we might also make a mistake in launching the war over the past 20 years or withdraw from Afghanistan?
Yeah, I agree with many elements my colleague in Washington had just detailed over the few last minutes. In order to introduce some historic perspective here, I would mention the obvious thing to us all, which is some of the European powers, major powers, had gone through adventures, both national, intellectual, military adventures of the kind the Americans had gone through over the last few decades before America did so. I have in mind, of course, the British and the French, and to some extent the Spaniards and the Germans and the Portuguese. So there is a lot of historical depth to look at in order to have some insights when we're looking at the large scale of time. What I'll add to what had been said in the context of the question you put to me is that regardless of the internal American scene and the way Americans look at themselves as the ones who carry democracy and freedom and positivity and is ambitious to spread it all over the world, regardless of what realities are all over the world, one have to keep in mind that when America launched the Afghanistan miserable military ambition 20 years ago, America was still in the extension of the 90s. It was not the 90s with 2001, but it was the extension of the 90s. It was right after the fall of the Berlin Wall. It was when there was one single superpower in the world. And that was the continuation of that. This is not the situation anymore, including in the perception of the Americans and their allies in Europe, because the American discourse, as well as other discourse, is that there is a major superpower now in the world, and the world is not empty and gives a place to one single American superpower. And this obviously is China. So, and China, on top of everything, in the context of Afghanistan, is just next door, has a border with Afghanistan. So the situation is very different in that sense, but lots of the insights that Americans had to go through bitterly and painfully right now are to be shared realistically by the French and the British and other allies in Europe.
Well, let's look at the real challenge, after this exit from Afghanistan by U.S. and the allies there. Republican Senator Lindsey Graham has warned, a parade of horribles and the chance of another 9/11. However, President Biden has said in his statement on Monday that ending the U.S. military mission was the best way to protect people's lives. So, Professor Kuznick, what's the next step for the U.S. to fight terrorism, or prevent, let's say, God forbid, another 9/11 attack?
Well, the United States is going to be actively engaged in fighting terrorism even if the United States is out of Afghanistan. The United States is already searching for bases in Central Asia. It's not as easy as it was after the Taliban in 2001 when the U.S. first got involved, because back then the United States had bases in Uzbekistan and Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan. Those countries now are much more, many of the countries in that region are more under the influence of Russia and China than they were back in 2001. So the United States is going to have to do a lot of its work from the Persian Gulf. Even some of the drone attacks most recently have come from the Gulf area, not from the immediate vicinity. But the United States is talking about over-the-horizon capabilities. You know, in the United States with its drones, even in Pakistan, the United States between 2015 and 2020 had 13,000 drone attacks. So the United States still has that capability. The United States also has a lot of signal intelligence, electronic eavesdropping. The United States can still conduct vast intelligence operations around the world. The United States is going to have to try to figure out some way to get human intelligence from inside Afghanistan, but the United States will probably figure out how to do that. Mm-hmm. So the United States is going to be able to combat terrorism as it is, and does not have to be inside of Afghanistan. But can Afghanistan be used as a base for operations? Was Afghanistan really needed by Al-Qaeda in order to do what it did? And the reality was that 9/11 was planned by some people in hotel rooms in Hamburg and working with people who were learning to fly in the United States. And at the time when the FBI agents in Minneapolis were reporting to Washington that there were a lot of Muslims learning to fly who had no interest in learning how to land. We could have stopped 9/11 if we had any modicum of competence at that point. President Bush was getting briefed day after day that Al-Qaeda is planning to strike in the United States. And what does Bush say? Okay, you covered your ass. Get out of here. They weren't concerned. Condoleezza Rice didn't want to hear it. Bush didn't want to hear it. Rumsfeld didn't want to hear it. So it's more a question of competence, getting the intelligence, assessing it intelligently, but also trying to figure out how we can work with our allies to make this a better world in which so many people are not suffering who are going to want to turn to these kinds of extreme alternatives. We live in a world in which the richest 6 people have more wealth than the poorest 4 billion people. That doesn't make any sense. So there's a lot of things we're going to have to deal with. We face real serious refugee issues. We face real serious climate issues that's going to worsen conditions for people all across the globe. So there is going to be an upsurge in terrorism if we don't begin to work together, meaning the United States, Russia, China, India, and other countries, and the Europeans, working together to solve the problems that we as a species on this planet are being confronted with. And among the immediate questions is still the nuclear threat that I write about all the time. I mean, that's the major existential threat that we all face. And we've got these crises over Taiwan, over Ukraine. You know, these are potential conflict areas that could explode.
Right. Let's bring in Mohammed in Pakistan. Facing this real threat of ISIS, Al-Qaeda, ETIM inside Afghanistan, obviously the CIA has confirmed that the U.S. government's ability to collect and act on threats will diminish with the withdrawal of its troops. Do you see there's a possible cooperation or further cooperation between Pakistan and the U.S. and possible cooperation between China, U.S., Pakistan, Russia, India, even with Taliban to fight the terror threat? That's a common enemy for everybody.
Pakistan have always, played a very great role in counterterrorism operations. Since the 9/11, Pakistan was the first victim country. The counterterrorism operations of the America and the allied forces started in Afghanistan, but it brought a huge impact, devastating impacts in Pakistan. So Pakistan have already played a very great role, significant role in counterterrorism operations. Our armed forces have played a very significant role, but now again, let me tell you that Pakistan in the last 20 years have continued its role, and now Pakistan is again ready. Pakistan have announced, our Prime Minister have announced, our military chief have announced, all of our the security institutions, they know the real situation, ground situation of Afghanistan and the new emerging threat of ISIS-K. And this ISIS-K is not only an enemy of the Afghan people or the new setup in Afghanistan, but it has emerged, it is the emerging threat for the regional stability as well. That's why there is a great opportunity for Pakistan, for China, for Russia, for Iran, and for all of the neighboring countries, regional countries, including Central Asia, to devise a very comprehensive strategy to launch a very successful operation, not only against ISIS-K, but also against those elements, against those groups, terror groups who are still operational in Afghanistan and in these complicated terrains. And it also includes East Turkestan Islamic Movement, which has also you can say make an alliance with other terror groups in Afghanistan and have damaged the interests of Pakistan, China, and other countries, not only in Afghanistan but in the region. So I think there is the opportunity, and these neighboring countries of Afghanistan, they should feel the responsibility, and they should avail the opportunity, because now there is a new setup in Afghanistan. So Afghan Taliban, they also need
Yes. Let me turn to another issue, very important issue, right after the withdrawal. Wenping, obviously now, along fighting, continuous fighting against terrorism in Afghanistan, another issue is really about peace, stability, and rebuilding of the nation. Taliban is now in control. What should the international community do to support, probably, or to encourage, to even guide them to do the right thing, to be rational, and to make sure this country is peaceful and stable for its own people, and also no place for the terrorists?
Yeah, I think you make a very important now point there. So to make the good thing happen, you use the push or pull way. So there's two kinds different approaches. If you use the pushing way, and then maybe you push the Taliban further away from those rational behavior. Because now we have seen a lot of good promises coming from Taliban. Now Taliban is just organizing the press conference now. I wish I will, to get to...
Let's take a listen.
Yeah, to get the more. Because
Mudahari.
the language now is different. They're using the language I cannot catch the major points, but later on I will digest what they have said.
Okay,
but I guess, all those messages definitely are very positive right now, because at that critical moment, I cannot imagine if Taliban makes some other very aggressive message or very negative those message that will bring the failure, to themselves.
That's right.
Right now, they have to, trying to encourage international society to give them more time.
Wenping, let's take a listen. This is Mudahari, the spokesperson of Taliban.
We are free now, and the nations who are not free, they are not the ones to be respected in international as a nation. It is the nature of our people and country that it shall be free forever. And if somebody tries to do that, there will be sense of same like they did last night. We heard propaganda against the Mujahideen for 20 years. It was believed that America will never be defeated. Even people who are well educated used to say that America will never go.
نو ځکه هیله مو دا ده چې دغه ورونه چې په دې باور و چې امریکا ماتې نه خوري او یا افغانان نسي کولی خپل ازادي ترلاسه کړي او یا نسي کېدلی چې د امریکې سره مقابله وسي خپل ذهنیت باید له سره بدل کړي له سره باید فکر وکړي له سره یو نوی ذهن خپل
I want to let those brothers to rethink about the thing that America can never do.
او د امریکایي تجاوز په وړاندې باندې ودرېد له هغه ورځې نه یې داسې باور و لکه دا تېره شپه یې باور سو چې امریکا به ماتې خوري له څه وجې نه دا باور
Afghan nation
ځکه افغانان مسلمان
had the trust from the first day 20 years ago that they haven't deceived them.
Celebrate their victory. They say, we are the one who defeated the U.S. I mean, they have a reason probably to celebrate over there. But right after that is a true challenge. That is how to run the country. They need international assistance. They need international cooperation. So internationally, please continue what we should do. China, U.S., Russia, India, Pakistan, regional countries. What the international community should respond in a positive manner to support positive development?
Yeah, I think at this critical moment, international society needs to play the guiding role rather than to push them away. We should pull them over and then to give them time and also the space to prove themselves, to deliver all those promises they have made. So I think at this moment, I don't agree those kind of thinking, saying now we need to make sanctions to Taliban and frozen the access and to make them more difficult to govern this country. Now Taliban is in the process to do transformation from organization to fight now to change to they can to govern a country now still in the this juncture moment, even to get a new birth. As Taliban spokesperson just mentioned, when the U.S. has made the final complete the withdrawal, they are saying today, the final day of the August 2021, now is the Liberation Day. And then also it's an Independence Day for Afghanistan. This country has been in war for such a long, long time. So we really hope if this is a new day, now people feel happiness for getting a new birth, then we got to let this Taliban to make this transformation happening, because without them, what else now you can see? The Ghani government already run away, and then the former those Afghanistan, those troops also nowhere to find. So if there's no Taliban there, so you cannot find anyone now can organize this country to govern the country.
Well, thank you, Wenpian. Well, with that, we are coming to the end of today's show. Many thanks to our guests again, and thank you for watching. See you next time.